Welcome. Good to have you with us this morning. I'm kind of concluding a series I've been in for a few weeks called Shot in the Arm. And I've really, next week we're really going to kind of bring all this to a head, and I'm really excited about it and hope you plan on being here because we're going to give you some things, some information you're going to really enjoy. But I really had, thinking about this week's message has really been on my heart because it's a heart-to-heart kind of conversation. So I really want you to think a little bit with me this morning, kind of put all the other stuff out of your head, whatever has been going on in your world, and let's just meditate on some of the things maybe that the Lord would want us to meditate on today. I was thinking about this message and reflecting, as most of us have over the last several weeks, with regard to the state of our country and contemplating where we've been and where we are and where we're going to go. And I was thinking, after great sacrifice, a lot of bloodshed, dozens of wars, with great ingenuity and innovation and hard work, all founded on godly principles, the United States of America has been the world's leader almost on every front for 244 years. I want you to ponder that for a second. And as you do that, I'm going to read to you a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 8. And I really want you to listen to these words. Be careful to follow every command that I'm giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land that the Lord promised an oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what it was that was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you or our ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out, your feet did not swell during those 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord God disciplines you. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks and streams and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and the hills, a land with wheat and barley and wine, vines of fig trees and pomegranates and olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day, Moses writes. Otherwise, when you eat and you're satisfied, when you build your fine houses and settle down, when your herds and your flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you will forget. You will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and its scorpions. He brought water out of a hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and to test you so that in the end it might go well with you. Now you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God. So says the Word of God. I'm a firm believer that it's easier to be faithful to God in adversity than it is in prosperity. I think history has proven that. In other words, the climb to the top is always motivational. We can rally around a mission. But the ability to stay on top, it's been harnessed by very, very, very few. Last year, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl over San Francisco 49ers 31-20. That victory was a long time coming, with many changes taking place in that organization over a period of time in order to get there. Today, Sunday, January 24th, the Chiefs are going to play the Buffalo Bills for the AFC Championship game. Whoever wins that game is going to go to the Super Bowl. The challenge, however, today for the Chiefs is that their quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, who was the MVP of last year's Super Bowl, suffered a concussion last week during the win over the Browns. And there's some questions about his ability to be able to do what he needs to do today to repeat going back to the Super Bowl. Most of you all are pretty aware that the University of Wildcat basketball team are having their worst start since the 1920s, even though they had a victory yesterday. And everyone is asking the question and raising the thoughts on what is going on. What's happening? Well, we can get into that, and there's a lot of things that are going on, but the bottom line is it's hard to stay on top. It's always hard to stay on top. That's true in every aspect of life. I mean, nations rise and fall. They usually begin with a sense of purpose and a mission. It rises to prominence and power, but then it's not long before indifference sets in, internal decay takes place, and eventually nations die. Think of all the businesses that have gone through the same thing. Pan Am, Woolworth, Toys R Us, Blockbuster, Tower Records, Oldsmobile, Sears, Circuit City, all gone. And the same principle that I'm talking about here really applies to churches as well. Here's a sobering thought. Think about this for a moment. There has never been a church ever that was smart enough to figure out a way to remain growing continually ever since the beginning of the church. In other words, there are no remaining churches that are alive and functioning today that you can trace all the way back to the first century and say, we've been here and we've remained vital for the kingdom of God for 2,000 plus years. Most churches can't even trace back 100 years, and usually in the life of the church, there are only 2 or 3 decades of vitality, and then stagnation sets in, and eventually churches die. Like all athletic teams, businesses, and nations, there is a cycle from birth to death. It's very, very, very difficult to stay on top. Some time ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Howard Hendricks who did a detailed study, and I remember how sobering it was to me to read this study that he did. He entitled it 4 Stages of an Institution's Life. 4 stages of an institution's life. He's a Christian man, taught at one of our theological seminaries, and he came up with this. He wrote these particular words. He said, any institution which is alive cannot be stagnant. It's either growing or it's dying. And then he went on to describe the stages. He said the first phase in the life of an organization is always the phase of need. Most institutions are born when someone perceives a need and then recruits people to join them, him or her, in paying an incredible price in order to meet that need. I mean, that's how our country got started, right? I mean, we all know that. That's how this church, Leesburg Christian Church, came to be. After this community became settled, and I'm getting ready to release, by the way, a DVD history of Leesburg Christian Church. Will be available to you here very shortly. But after this area became a community and it was settled, someone got together, and I'll explain that to you in my DVD, and they said, we need a church. And so they sacrificed and they organized Leesburg Christian Church in 1826. And when people rally around a vision like that, participants are willing to make incredible sacrifices in order to meet that particular need. That's phase one. The second phase of the life of an institution is that of the growth or dynamic phase, or the growth dynamic phase. In this stage, there are great demands on the people involved. They have to rise to the occasion of the mission. And as they do so, other people look at it and they are inspired to get on board, and a lot of things get achieved. Lots. Just like here at Leesburg Christian Church that I have seen even in my short 19-year tenure of the history of this church. You know, I think back and I remember parking in mud, and I remember, no air conditioning in the other building, and I remember, when we turn on the furnace, the black smoke rolled out and the ceiling falling down, and all this kind of crazy stuff that we've been through here together just in my tenure. People endured all that and sacrificed because of the mission that we have been trying to accomplish. But then comes the third stage in the life of an institution. It's when it begins to level off and it begins to stagnate. This is the stage of acceptance and stagnation. It is the phase of reputation. The organization builds a reputation to the point where people feel like, wow, we did it. So they begin to take pride in simply belonging to that particular group or institution. And in church world, they often become like the church at Sardis in Revelation chapter 3. They have a reputation for being alive, but really they're dying or dead. And then sadly comes the final stage in the life of an institution, and that is the stage of demise. It's the phase of what used to be. This is a stage where groups spend more time looking at the banners and the rafters of what they used to do more than they look up and imagine the banners yet to come to put in the rafters. In church world, they talk about what they used to do, their past preachers, their past events. They live in the past with no real response for the future and no real strategy moving forward. And frequently you hear the last 7 words of a dying church, we've never done it that way before. This is a stage when morale gets low, grumbling gets high, and those who have been around for a while tend to say, I'm tired of doing all the work, I've paid my dues, let somebody else do it. The result is of that, there is a loss, a significant loss of team effort, because selfish individual needs now become more important than the original mission that birthed the institution to begin with. Hendricks points out that churches in this fourth phase don't even know that they're in trouble, and they usually blame it on the preacher. So that's when the hire and fire process comes in. They hire one, it doesn't help, and so they fire him, and they hire another one, and that doesn't help, so they fire him. He says they're a lot like Samson in Judges chapter 16, who wakes up one morning and didn't know the Spirit of God had even departed from him. So they continue to go through the motions, but spirit-wise, they're dead. Now, when an institution reaches a state of demise, it takes tremendous effort to bring revitalization to the organization. It usually means a complete turnover of personnel and leadership, and it brings with it a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. The point being that I'm trying to make to you today is that it's much easier to maintain momentum than it is to restart a stalled vehicle, which has me of grave concern for the church at large today, because our vehicle's been stalled for about a year. So obviously, the critical period for any organization is in the middle of the growth cycle. If the group is going to continue to stay on top, there has to be a conscious effort to retain that phase of dynamics that got them there to begin with. So the big question is, well, how do you do that? Because it's in that period when everything seems to be going okay, you think, well, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? You've all heard that. I'm happy to tell you that we really are, COVID aside, as a church right here in the middle of this growth cycle, and we've been in it for a while. Thank God for it. There have been a lot of sacrifices that have been made here. There is a team spirit that prevails in this place, which I'm very thankful for. Morale has been high, even in the midst of bad things happening around us. We've enjoyed a lot of success as a ministry, taking on a lot of new projects and programs and missions, and it's an exciting place to be. Lives continue to be changed, which is exciting. The staff here works together well as a team. Leadership is solid, and the overall word that I think to describe what goes on here at Leesburg is that of harmony. And I'm very grateful for that. But how do we stay in this phase of growth? How do we stay on top, if you will? How do we avoid passivity and acceptance and then decline? I really believe that was Moses' grave concern as he addressed the children of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 8. The land of Canaan was theirs for the taking. They could take it. They had been in slavery. People now had paid a tremendous price, and now they're entering this time of growth and organization as they pursued their mission of freedom and prosperity as they became the most powerful nation on earth. But Moses warned them not to become passive, not to rest on their reputation, because staying on top doesn't happen automatically. And so he says, remember how you got here and maintain your discipline, because if you forget the Lord, you're going to be destroyed. I want to suggest to you over the next few moments 4 ways that we can keep the momentum of our mission and our ministry going here for years to come. This is one of the most important messages I've ever shared with you as a body. First of all, there has to be a deep commitment to continue to sacrifice for the greater good and the cause of what we're trying to accomplish. Over time, almost every organization, yes, even the church, loses its sacrificial spirit. Why is that? Well, there's 2 enemies that I have observed over the years that have a tendency to set in over a period of time. Number 1 is burnout. That's what we commonly call it. There is a danger, and there's always a danger, for people becoming overcommitted for an extended period of time, and you simply get exhausted, coupled with the feeling that no one really cares what you do or how long you've been doing it. So you feel underappreciated, and that often leads people to quitting or to giving up. Now, it's true that sometimes burnout can be cop-out, sometimes, an excuse, but it also can be legit. We tend to wear out. That's why God ordained for His people in the Old Testament, 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th you shall rest. It's why He instituted sabbaticals every few years. The second enemy of sacrifice has always been that of laziness. Laziness. That's when we like to eat the fruit, but we don't want to go out and plow the field for next year's crop, right? We're more concerned about our rights and our privileges and how we can be served rather than how we can serve other people. Deuteronomy chapter 8 here, he says, be careful, otherwise when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God. Listen, I just want you to understand, it is essential that if we are going to continue to grow, that we maintain a commitment of involvement. We have to do that, which is as healthy for you individually as it is beneficial for the church or the ministry as a whole. The Bible tells us to be faithful unto death, and you will receive the crown of life. Faithfulness does not end at 65. And it doesn't have to start when you're 35. We are to be faithful unto death. Friends, we cannot expect the best for our families of this community if we're not going to be willing to get involved and provide the best for our families of this community. Jesus said, I didn't come to be served, people. I come to serve, and that's what I want you to do. Just like the Israelites, we can't forget what God has done for us through Jesus, and that one thing alone should motivate us to always give our best for Him, regardless. I want to remind you of something that's important today. And this isn't a knee-jerk response to anything. I truly have always believed this to be true. We have a better message than they have at the local hospital. We have a better message than they do at the local funeral home. Even though I love seeing Sherman at the funeral home alive, there is a better message here than at the local funeral home. We have a better message than the school system. Because in the church, we're not talking about a temporary cure or preserving the body or just gaining more information. We're talking about eternal life. That's not to say those other things aren't important. They surely are. But eternal life is the most important thing. And you just can't find that anywhere else. It's only found in Jesus Christ and in His church. So remember that. The second essential for staying on top is for all of us collectively to have a healthy flexibility that's always open to change. Always open to change. Now, I got to say, and I got to brag on this group here at Leesburg, we've changed so much stuff, it doesn't even faze you all anymore. You all are good. You all get this. You have got it. In the past, you've always been willing, hey, if we don't try it, we'll back up and pump. We've always had that mentality. But we can't forget that. We cannot forget that. The idea of, well, it's worked up to now, why change it, are always the words of a dying organization. They're always the words of a dying organization. Change is always a must. Now, stay with me on this, for staying on top. And I'm going to tell you why that is. There's a couple reasons for this as well. Number one, personnel age. Personnel age. Michael Jordan doesn't play basketball anymore. You want to know why? He can't. Tiger Woods is having his 5th back surgery right now. And whether or not he'll ever win again is speculation. He's done some incredible things, but he's about done. If you don't give new blood a chance to play or to participate, the organization always has a tendency to stagnate with old ideas and traditions that have long passed. Second reason is that competition always improves. And the organization that refuses to be innovative will always be left in the dust. People don't come to your place at work anymore to install fax machines. But there was a time they did. We don't do that anymore. Methods can become ineffective over a period of time. Ideas in the church that worked 50 years ago, they don't work anymore. And that's just being blunt about it. Israel, this isn't new. Israel was going to enter the land of promise, but they had the same God. But even though they had the same God, everything was going to be different from now on. Change was coming. Moses wasn't always going to be their leader. God had provided all their food up to now, but in the promised land, they were going to have to farm for themselves. There wasn't going to be any more manna from heaven and quail in the wilderness. God prevented their shoes from wearing out when they were walking around in the wilderness. Now they're going to have to make their own shoes. While they were out in the wilderness for a whole generation, 40 years, they were worshiping in a tent. Now they're going to worship in a building, a permanent building called a temple. God was the same God, but the methods that they were going to use were going to be different. Friends, I want you to understand something very important. The purpose of the church never changes, ever, but methods do. And we can't ignore that lest the church die. Dead churches are always those who force people to worship the way that their grandparents did. If you can prove to me otherwise, I'll talk about it. I learned a little slogan many, many years ago that has served me well, even though I at times don't like it. But it goes like this: methods are many, principles are few. Principles never change, but methods always do. In the Bible, God describes himself as the God of the living. He isn't tied to 17th century music, 18th century architecture, and 20th century programming. He's a God that is alive among the living. The third imperative for us to stay on top is maybe one of the most difficult ones, and that is we have to have controlled egos. Controlled egos. This is where organizations can go awry very, very, very quickly. One of the reasons that teams and companies experience downfalls is because people have their egos get out of control. Someone thinks they're more important than somebody else because they've been there longer through tenure, because they, or whatever, or they become jealous that somebody else is getting attention and praise that they think that they ought to be getting for whatever reason, and that kind of thing always leads to division. But Jesus said a house divided against itself cannot stand. Just can't. The nation of Israel initially had a team spirit when they entered Canaan. But it didn't take long for egos to get out of control, did it? David sinned. Solomon indulged. His sons grew up and split the whole kingdom in two. All ego. Ephesians chapter 4 verses 2 and 3 gives us this warning. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That's our challenge, and it's a big one. The fourth ingredient, essential for staying on top and continuing in the growth cycle, is, in my opinion, maybe the most important. And that is, it's a good memory that trusts God. A good memory that trusts God. Every successful organization has to battle self-reliance, because to go the other way is just one step toward failure every time. When Israel entered the promised land, the first thing that God did for them, I don't know if you recall how the sequence of events, but the first thing that God did for them is he allowed them to conquer the city of Jericho. And it was a major victory, big victory, big. And then Israel began to think about that. And they began to think that they were pretty big stuff. And so the next battle that they were going to be engaged in was against a little village called Ai. And instead of depending on God and prayer, you know what they did? They sent a small contingency of troops against Ai, thinking that the city would be easy to conquer, and they got humiliated. They got busted instead. And God reminded them it was Him that was giving them the victory. They were only powerful because He was powerful. And so in Deuteronomy 8, 17, and 19, he says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. He says, but remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce. Don't ever forget that, individually or us as a group. Let's always remember what God has done for us and what He's done for this church. It is His Spirit. It is His power. It is His providence that has brought us here individually and together. Don't ever forget that. It's so easy for us to get complacent and say, let's just do what we've always been doing. I want to remind you today that the God who has led us in the past is going to continue to challenge us in the future. And if we'll be sensitive to His leading, He'll provide in a way that we would never have imagined. You know, I don't know exactly. And this is the intrigue of it all for me. I don't know exactly what God has in store for this ministry, this church. But I know this. I do know this. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. God wants us to keep stretching and standing for truth and reaching the lost and ministering to the hurting. And I really believe that if we walk into His will and stay motivated to the mission, that He will provide, because He's the one who said, I'll never leave you and I'll never forsake you. And all that I've said is not just true corporately here for the church, it's all true for you as an individual as well. It's tough. It's tough to keep going. It's tough to keep striving. It takes sacrifice. It takes the willingness to change. It takes the ability to swallow your ego and have a team spirit with complete reliance on God, not on yourself. But it's possible as we allow Him to move through us. I'm done. That's quick, wasn't it? Got your communion? If you don't, go grab it real quick. We always talk about the time of communion being reflective, and certainly it is. And here's what the psalmist told us in Psalm 37:5. Commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust Him, and He will help you. You know, if I were to sum up what communion really is all about, I would have to probably pull out the word trust. I mean, there's a lot of different words we could use, but trust is a big one, because that's what faith is. I wasn't there and saw Jesus' body hanging on a cross. I wasn't there and touched the nail prints in His hands when He rose from the dead. But I also wasn't there when George Washington crossed the Delaware. I wasn't there when they signed the Declaration of Independence. I wasn't present at Hiroshima and Nagasaki when they dropped the atomic weapons. But I believe all that stuff is true. But even more importantly, I trust what it is that Jesus did for me when He died and when He came back. And right now I'd like for you to think of maybe and recall maybe some of the most important words that Jesus spoke that are powerful to you. Father, we pause in this moment to do just what your word has told us to do. To remember, to examine, to partake, to look at the motives within us. You have a mighty call on our lives. And as a result, we have an incredible hope that we share. But our concern today, Lord, and the reason we're assembled here is because we have a mission, and that is, our mission is that we're concerned about those who don't have that hope in our community. Those who are literally dying of fear and loneliness and of abuse by the adversary who wants to destroy them. So we're thankful for this sustenance that this small ordinance gives us in our souls. To stay on mission, to stay motivated, to remember what it was that kept you going, to keep us going. So as we partake, we pray the blessing that comes with it. So let's take the bread together and remind ourselves of why we trust in Jesus. And let's drink together so we may never forget the new covenant that He's promised us. Bought by His blood.